Okay, so I would now come to you on growing up here in Ghana and being from the north. How was it like for you?
Actually, I was born here
Okay.
in '87, but I spent most of my upbringing in Accra. I think I lived here till I was about 2 years before I moved to Accra, and I had most of my training in Accra. I studied in two different boarding schools, Prince Boateng and St. John's, and then went to JSS in a different school. They were mostly Catholic schools, and went to Pope John Senior High in Koforidua, where I did art. That was my first encounter of doing art properly.
Okay.
Before that, I was doing graphic design in junior high school and things like that. And I realized it was something that I was quite good at it. My father has always been very encouraging about doing art, which is very unusual among parents. Yeah. But because I used to draw a lot, so my family thought there was some kind of potential for it. So when I went to secondary school, I did painting and sculpture for 3 years, and afterwards, I realized that I wanted to become an artist at that stage. So I enrolled to go and do painting and sculpture BFA at K University, where Mr. Dawson studied. Of course, the system that when he went to K University to do the program I did the same program as he did, painting, but he was one of the first 3 students that enrolled in the program. Back then. But when I went, of course, several years had passed, and we had new professors like Dr. Caricature and other people who were more or less advocating for more freedoms within the arts. So artists, there was a painting program. You just don't think of painting as some kind of traditional medium where you paint on a canvas or use color, but you can actually also use things that exist around you. So that's how come my practice as an artist emerged. I started working more with objects around me, old parts of buildings, a lot of buildings that were built in Mr. Dawson's age when he was growing up, around the time of independence, before that, which later, of course, not just art, buildings also were destroyed. A lot of our history over the years have always been destroyed. There's this sense of wastefulness within our history if you look at us as a country, and we never really identify what the most important things are for us to preserve. So I collected a lot of those things, like going to the railways, going to like industrial spaces, collecting archives, informations here and there, because I realized that in order to make art that also spoke within our time, we also needed material that had that significant history to it, and also things that could expand the language of art beyond just the hegemonic form of painting, which was somehow reduced down to the canvas.
Okay, right. So let's talk about the Savannah Center for Contemporary Art. What made you decide to, start such an initiative, and especially in Tamale?
Well, to begin with, growing up, I've always wanted to come back to Tamale one way or the other. I think it became more important to me when I became an artist, and also traveling around the world, working with museums, doing exhibitions, and you go to all kinds of places to do things. But you realize that also there's a lot of potential for things back here in Tamale. Because one of the things I mostly disliked when I was growing up was the fact that many people wanted to leave Tamale and go settle in Accra because they thought things were already established in Accra and you could do good business or whatever there. But I think sometimes it's very important that we also establish things in places where we would have to learn through the thing itself. And Savannah Center for Contemporary Art actually started as a studio. I was discussing with my father in 2013 about the possibility of building a studio here so I could move here when I started practicing. So we started building this space in Senate area full. And 2014 in February we started building it. And then between that time and early part of 2016, I decided that okay, fine, I would maybe put more energy into establishing other spaces and then dedicate this one purely to exhibitions.
Yeah.
That was around the time that I met Mr. Dawson.
Okay.
In 2015, we went to Nigeria for an art. They were honoring one Ghanaian artist, Ellen Atri. He's like one of the greatest artists that ever lived.
Yeah.
He's still very much still alive. But he also studied at KNUST, but he practices and lives mostly in Nigeria. Yeah. So we are honoring him. So we went together with the delegation from the university, and Mr. Dawson also came. So then I was discussing with him about some of the projects I was working on in Tamale and how I would really like to do an exhibition on his work, because I was a bit familiar with his work.
Yeah.
And Mr. Dawson is one of the few people that attends almost every exhibition, every talk in town. Like anytime there's anything happening in town, he comes.
He comes. Okay.
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter. He's very supportive of this generation and also artists across.
Yeah.
He doesn't. There are some artists who never go for any programs if it's not theirs. Yeah, if they're not doing an exhibition for themselves, they wouldn't go. But Mr. Dawson goes for everything. So that aspect also of his practice is also something that drew me to him, because there was this kind of integrity and genuineness within his being. So we started discussing the possibilities, but then the building was still at a very young stage. Yeah. So as the building was developing, I was keeping him informed. And then I had a conversation with a colleague of mine, Bernard Akwe Jackson, who is the curator for the exhibition, about the possibility of curating an exhibition of Dawson's life's work and also publishing a monograph and a catalog, something like that. So we started actually discussing it, and then I think last year, when we realized that the building was becoming more and more concrete, we started looking into dates and what the space would become, and we finally agreed that we would dedicate the space purely, the first space, Savannah Center for Contemporary Art, to artists from Mr. Dawson's generation, and also generations, some of the generations that came after him, but mostly coming from the 20th century and the contributions that they made. So you realize that it's not just artists, but there'll also be architects. We'll be doing exhibitions on architects, on maybe exhibitions on some musicians that have left great legacies, who are still alive or dead, and all kinds of practitioners who, not just within the field of art, have contributed significantly also to the way that intellectual discourse and other things have been shaped.
Okay. All right. So even though I feel like you mentioned it, but let me just be sure that why did you decide on his works? I'm sure there are other, artists in Ghana. So why did you decide on that?
I think the decision was based on his experimentation, as I said before, and the fact that he's also one artist who's worked a lot. He has about 60 years of practice, you realize, and his work. There were many other artists maybe within his generation whose works became commercially successful in a way that they had a practice where they could make paintings and things and they could live out of it. But Mr. Dawson was mostly, and some of them too were public servants, but they would still manage. But Mr. Dawson, the interesting thing about his practice was that he was purely interested in art for the sake of making art.
Okay.
So he didn't necessarily make art for the sake of living as an artist mostly. So if you look at his life's work, his notes, his the experiments that he made, you realize that it spans an entire period. You'd sometimes not even believe that one artist did all these different experiments. For instance, some of the experiments he did, maybe he will speak a bit more on what motivated him, but he works with these plantain leaves, and then he puts them on like newspapers, and then he would compress them. He was making his the stains would change the color of the newspaper. He was making his own brushes to make paints. Normally, within the modernist tradition, the artist just goes to buy the brush and then the canvas and he paints. But that act of even making that brush in itself out of these materials, I think is something that is very important, because artists are always people who become these kinds of mediators between the way the world, the construct of the world is, and other forms of reality. So that's one thing that actually excited me very much about his practice, and also just his sense of modesty as a person as he is. So we're always asking ourselves, how could we make work how could we celebrate people who've made very significant contributions to our society, but yet remain very humble and very silent within the way they do things? Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Dawson, he just mentioned some of your experiments that you have been doing. So what are some of the reasons, or why do you get into things like that? Like forgetting, just normal drawing and all of that. Why do you get into things like that?
Well, I was sedentary working at the government office. So a lot of time was at my disposal.
Yeah.
And if you're sitting down, you have to think. And also, as a civil servant, you can't do your own thing. Because if they give you a post and you are there, you see some worker will come and pose a problem. We want this, we want this. So you can't be a civil servant and an artist. So you must make maximum use of the spare time you have. That's when you close. You don't go home. You stay on and work. I remember the first time I worked until midnight.
Yeah.
In the office after everybody
Left.
is closed.
Yeah.
I had to mark that time that, hey, so an artist can work till midnight. That was so I had a very good friend called Kofi Sitoji. And one day in our discussions, he said that he will never be caught painting an African carrying a load on his head, on her head. So that was a big movement in Ghanaian art, where the emphasis we put on carry load came to an end historically. Until 1984, somebody said, I would never paint anybody carrying anything on the head. So I'm looking at his painting to see if he has broken that law. But I paint people carry things on their head.
Okay.
So,
But it's a conscious decision.
Yes.
Yes, which is very important to note. Yes.
So then, in the modern art, we hear of Senegal taking lead over Ghana, over Nigeria, over South Africa in promotion of art in the Dakar Biennale.
Okay.
So I was also Islamic, 99% Islamic, and the Quran forbids making of images. So I wonder a great deal why a completely Islamic country can be leading the art world of the black people in the whole world. So when immediately I went on pension, I had some small fund. I used it to go to Dakar. But then there was about a week to the Biennale to see what's happening there. Why in the Islamic country, a desert country where the only sun could be leading the whole world in African art. So I found a reason. And also I wanted to learn from them because they don't draw human beings, but they do abstract and installation. I want to see how installation are done. Because in Ghana we didn't know anything about installation. So there I learned that nobody teaches installation to an artist. It has to come from your own thing. They have some very beautiful beaches, and the sand is like gold. So I think it's to sustain interest in Europeans who want, or people who want to come and have summer holidays and feel the warmth of Africa. So it's a very important asset they have to hold on to. And knowing that the other people love art, they stuck to the art to attract, for tourists to you have a reason for taking the trouble to come to Africa.
Yeah, and also their president, Senghor, also had this idea and belief and philosophy of the negritude. Yeah, also, which was also very important as at that time, because it somehow inspired also Africans to think about how, like black consciousness with relation to how the people could think about being equals. Like, because you need a certain spirit in order to believe. And it's like Nkrumah's African personality in a way. But some of those things at certain points, they are myths, but they are important actually to inspire people within that time. And I think it helped also the arts of Senegal a lot within that period, because culturally people began to realize that it was very important to at least be able to create institutions. When you go to Senegal, for instance, there are a lot of museums and things there, and they have the Dakar Biennale, and biennales are more like these huge art exhibitions that happen every 2 years. Yeah, so when it happens, they invite some of the most significant artists and also artists doing important work to come and exhibit their work. So they could be from Ghana, the US, but most of the Biennale is mostly dedicated to artists from Africa and its diaspora. So artists of African descent who live in America or Europe or anywhere. And it's been very important in a way that it's shaped also the knowledge systems around African art, and also its preservation, and also the aesthetics even around it.
So what would you say are some of the challenges you've encountered, in the world of art, like in Ghana here, and then maybe setting up a place like the Savannah Center for Contemporary Arts?
I think, for me, my concern has always been the lack of infrastructure. Yeah. So with someone like Mr. Dawson, with his generation, and a lot of the significant work that was done within that period, it's very important that at least spaces are created that contextualizes their work and puts their work into a certain kind of perspective or historical relevance. When we were in art school, like him, but several years apart, you don't have institutions, like you don't have museums, you don't have galleries that you are aiming to work towards. So sometimes it doesn't really inspire students to want to become artists, because you are in school, you are making art, and then you ask yourself, so when I finish, how am I going to make art? Not even about how you're going to survive, or because a lot of artists make work which they don't earn money from, but at least the satisfaction of being able to make work and knowing that the work is going to be at least preserved and appreciated, like even like celebrated, all those things. So one of the things I told myself was that the very moment I begin to earn money as an artist, I'm going to develop spaces like that. So actually that's where the Savannah Center for Contemporary Art came. And the fact that even as young artists, we should think about the infrastructural aspect of our practice in relation to even our practice itself. So for instance, I produce as an artist, I travel all the time globally to do exhibitions, but at the same time, how do I produce something here which also contributes towards the growth of the community and also to recontextualize things? And that's one thing that we lack, and we need a lot of state support, and not just supporting it because it's something like a token, but dealing with it just the same way as we would deal with other matters within the states.
So are there other things that we as a people, not necessarily the state, but we as a people can do and to should I say have show more interest, or in art? Because I think that for most people we do not value art that much in Ghana, like especially for the layman, let me put it that way.
I think one of the things, the myth is always that the black man is poor and doesn't have enough money and hasn't eaten well enough, so why would he have time to appreciate art? But art has always come, we've always lived in art. It's in different forms with regards to us. When you go to Sirigu and other places, you realize that the way the women painted the buildings and the men's contributions, the labor factors and all those things are things that really need to be interpreted. Like our mothers collecting cloths, plates and other things. Of course, some of these they are quite unconscious, the way we hold on to certain specific aspects of our personal lives and all that. We need to be able to at least extend that into a much larger societal role. Even with regards to even let's looking at Dagbon in terms of the chieftaincy, how certain relics and things are preserved, the traditions, all those things, they are attitudes that we need to somehow translate into building like national or state institutions. Yeah. Even when you go to the Ashanti Kingdom with Otumfo, like all the activities and things that happen within the traditional state. We go to the South, like all the systems. So we need to at least be able to borrow from those, and at least that's sense of attitude. We need to be able to translate it into into national institutions in a way that we can build museums for preserving these things, that younger generations can go there, can learn more about those relics, artifacts. And eventually, like, we're Savannah Center for Contemporary Art is purely built for contemporary art and modern art and all of the things, attitudes around it. But the idea is that eventually the center would expand into all kinds of things, archaeology, traditional history. So it's actually something that is going to expand as the years goes by.
Okay, so let's talk about the exhibition, the event. When is it happening? Where is it happening? And all of the details.
Yeah, so the exhibition is happening at the Savannah Center for Contemporary Art, which is opening next week on Friday 15th at it's around Snit Junction for when you are coming from the regional office. There is behind the regional office. There's a school there. St. John's of the Cross. It's just next. The Savannah Center for Contemporary Art is just next to it. Even when you Google it on Google Earth, it will bring you right there. And also the Ghana Post, we've done a location for it. And it's actually supposed to be on for 5 months. So from now up until August 15th this year. And it will mostly show the paintings, videos, interviews of Mr. Dawson and his life's work, experiments. The space includes a library, a reference library where young people can actually come in and use the materials there. Schools, so we're doing a lot of workshops for schools. Main focus is mostly like young people, so like primary schools, secondary schools, junior high schools, universities. So our aim is to at least invite all the schools in the northern region and other places to actually come and visit the center to do workshops and also to see the exhibitions and programs that we're going to do. And then we also have computers there with internet access where young people who are maybe into design and software and other things can also have quiet places where they could actually maybe have workstations to reflect upon the things that they do. Things like that, just creating a space where young people can actually come to look at the legacy of work that has been done and also to reflect upon their own work through.
All right. Thank you very much for coming. I think we should all endeavor to be there on the 15th of March 2019. That's next Friday. This has been Sonata Zamba. See you next time.